Hey, everybody, another Crazy People podcast episode. On today's show, Louisville politician, entrepreneur, social guy, Ben Reno-Weber. What do you think, Maurice?
First of all, I was over prepared. Too many questions. So we had to wrap it up what felt like halfway through at best. And also so many stories, so many different,
Hmm.
way different areas that we touched on, from public policy to empathy to business to microloans to I don't even know what else we have, but I know something. It wasn't boring. That how long did you take talk? About an hour?
Yeah,
That went by like this.
yeah.
I was still in the warming up phase, and suddenly we were like, "Oh yeah, we're running out of time." Like, "Woo." What do you think, Russ?
Yeah, I think if you have watched or listened to a bunch of episodes, every now and then there's one where I just don't say anything. And this was one of those where I said very, very little. But it's because I was just really enthralled with his idea, though he didn't say it this way. But he gave a bunch of examples that point this way that really, if you approach the political process as an entrepreneur and you
Yeah,
say, my constituents in the city, I see them as customers who, and government is the product that we want them to consume. And so maybe they need housing or they need some benefits or some help or some program, whatever they need.
yeah,
Um, and but he talked about how to focus that effort and how to understand how to empathize with people. Um, that really just opened my eyes. I see politics a lot as a battleground, and he was like, no, 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 no. It should be much different. So I can only hope that Ben continues his good work here locally, and who knows whatever comes, in years to come. But yeah,
definitely.
it's great, great discussion. You folks watching and listening, stay tuned. You'll love it.
Absolutely. All right, here we go.
Because really, what could go wrong once first record, right?
Exactly. What could go wrong? It's all going to be very perfect.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Crazy People Doing a Podcast, the Crazy People Podcast. I am Russ Broomell. Over there on the other side of the window is the Captain of Curiosity, Maurice Hofmann, and in the middle in the hot seat, Ben Reno-Weber. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. First of all, thanks for taking the time because preparing for this interview, I saw that you're doing about 1,000 things at the same time. Some are more crazy than the others. So why don't we start with your origin story and more or less at the beginning? So how did it all happen that way?
Yeah, so I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. I am the son of a political science professor who was focused on religion and politics and a shrink. And when people hear that, the rest of the story kind of makes sense. When I was in middle school and high school, I did these programs through the Kentucky YMCA
Yeah.
that were called KYA and CUNA, Model State Government, Model UN. And in those, we got these little micro doses of government through doing a simulation where we would all go to Frankfurt and we would write laws and we debate those laws, which, by the way, about 400 of the laws that were proposed as kids are actually laws in Kentucky now. And we would also do these programs where for 3 days we would represent a country at the United Nations. And those things really helped inspire me to feel like those were areas that I wanted to be involved. So went to school in DC at George Washington University, studied abroad a couple of times, and my first job out of school ended up being for the World Bank. And what I did for the World Bank was this kind of thing called microfinance.
Hmm.
We very small loans, very poor people usually, mostly micro entrepreneurs, people who had never had access to the resources to start a business. And what I could see in that was that the financial empowerment changed their lives and also made the world a better place. And that's sort of been the through line of my career, that intersection of innovation, entrepreneurship, and social good.
Yeah. So that's how you became a social entrepreneur, kind of? Is that the
Yeah, I could
concept?
see. Yeah. I mean, it was such a, like, microfinance is such an interesting model because when it works, the people who are loaning the money can make some money. The people who get the money can make some money, and everyone is benefited.
Yeah. What do you think has the biggest impact to allow people to reach their full potential?
I think that, and this fast forwards a little bit to the work that I do right now with the University of Louisville. So I work also at the Health Equity Innovation Hub, which is this grant funded center that focused on helping people who have a lived experience, a particular insight into some kind of health inequity to develop solutions or scale those solutions. And I think what's really interesting is, you know, you've heard this: talent is evenly distributed, but opportunity is not.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what the most important pieces are. Can we create this playing field in which these people who deeply understand the issues, their voices get heard? Because most of the people who have access to the resources or the systems don't have those experiences. And it's not that they wouldn't try to solve those problems if they understood them, it's that they just don't understand them.
And a lot of it's called tech revolution right now, right? Because a lot of the things that are happening there, it's about opportunity and kind of like not leaving anybody behind, because that's where I see one of the big challenges.
So I think there's a lot of pieces to being left behind. And there's a lot of opportunities that are coming with the way that tech is becoming simpler and easier to use. So let's set aside for a moment the kind of Terminator, like doomsday components to AI that are real. Like, I don't want to, it's not that I don't think they're real and worthy of conversation. Let's just set that aside for a second. Once you have overcome the super earliest barriers of technology, so do I have a device? Can that device access the internet in a way that is affordable? And do I have a comfort and familiarity with that tech that at least lets me engage at a basic way, right? Those are real deep things that need to be addressed at a systemic level just by straight investment.
Yeah.
Like, we need to make internet access on a smart device like electricity or water. It's impossible for a human, almost impossible for a human not to happen. So like, that needs to happen, right?
Yeah.
That's just a straight investment. Then after that, you start getting into what I think is the really interesting part, which is, can we make the tools of innovation accessible to normal people? And I think the answer is, especially now that we have simplified some of the components like chatbot, like the answer is yes, we can. We just have to work really hard at it. And that's important because I think that full diversity of the human experience with access to those tools means that the problems that people face are going to get solved. So I'll give you a super concrete example. All right.
Yeah.
So
you
guys know Slack. You ever use Slack?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's giant, massive. It's a unicorn company. It's used all over the place. It is basically AOL Instant Messenger with like labels.
Yeah.
Like, there's not a lot else. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on there, but like functionally, this isn't such a crazy thing. Yeah. And it really started solving the problems for this very specific set of like tech developers in Silicon Valley. Right. And the problem wasn't like that crazy. It was just like, how do we communicate better? Okay. So we have now raised and spent hundreds of millions of dollars on this product that solves basically this problem for this kind of desk-bound tech worker. It is almost impossible for a shift worker at a restaurant or a paramedic to trade shifts online.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm scheduled for Saturday night. I can't work Saturday night. Who wants it? Click here.
Yeah.
This isn't even like hard technology to build. But the people whose problem that is don't have access to the resources to solve that problem. Now, it's not that there isn't some version of that now, But like,
Mhm.
it's not common. Most of the people that I
Mhm.
talk to they still have a phone tree.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean about having people with those range of experiences have access to the innovation resources. Right. Here's another one. When they built out the hardware to do automatic syncs, right? You
Mhm.
don't have to touch the thing, right? They basically didn't test it on black and brown people.
Yeah.
Oops. Right. So that's why it's so important to have black and brown people and LGBTQ plus people and, like involved in the innovation ecosystem because
Mhm.
you can't get ignored if you're in the room.
Mhm.
Now, it is lightly horrifying from the perspective of an ally that no one else in the room was like, hey, like that's also a thing because it shouldn't always fall on the person with that lived experience to be their own advocates. It's a slightly different story.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And
Yeah.
I think also with it comes to enable that being in a room. It also requires a portion of education because just being in a room
Yeah.
and not understanding what's going on is really a
Mhm.
weird situation to be in. So how do you
Yeah.
ensure, and that's where I found it interesting that you are involved with the YMCA or the Y, how they call it now. How do you ensure that all the people have access to the basic education so that they can start working on those projects or even understand the principles of it?
Yeah, totally. So Nikki Lanier, who is one of my friends and mentors, used to be the head of the Louisville branch of the Federal Reserve, talks a lot about the glass cliff. So we got to hear a lot about the glass ceiling. Okay, we're going to break through the glass ceiling. This creates all these opportunities. But the glass cliff is when you break through the glass ceiling, but you don't have the infrastructure or the training or the preparation. So you go out and Wile E. Coyote and fall off the cliff.
Yeah.
And that is what I fear has happened with a lot of our initiatives around diversity. We were like, so scrambling to address some of the issues of historical inequities that we didn't give people the right supports to be successful in the spaces that they were put.
Hmm.
So I think that's a real, you just got to recognize that there's a learning curve for everybody in everything. And for some communities, that learning curve gets addressed more organically
Hmm.
through family or through education, through the schools. And for some communities, that is just not the case.
Mhm.
Right. So when I thought about becoming an entrepreneur, like really becoming an entrepreneur, I was running a YMCA and we struggled with the way that we engaged volunteers. YMCA, had a ton of volunteers. We needed them at specific times and specific numbers with specific skills. And at that point, there were not good technological solutions to let people sign up. Oh, I'll do this shift. I'll coach this thing. And, when I've got 20 people, I'm done.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it would remind them we just didn't have that. So, um, a buddy of mine who'd gone through the YMCA programs that I did as a kid, and I started this company called Mobile Serve. And I had never thought about how much of my experience growing up I was absorbing entrepreneurial skills and mindset and questions until I did that. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, wait, I have two car dealers in my family. And my mom is a shrink who actually runs her own small business. And so there were all sorts of resources around me that I could ask, like, is this crazy? Or would you look at my balance sheet? Or can you look at this? So, like, totally independent of my own skills and experiences, there was all of that. And so I think part of the issue is, well, if that's not true of certain communities, we need to invest intentionally in creating those resources for those communities. And
Yeah.
that's not like that's also true of my in-laws, right? Like my brother-in-law is a contractor. There are very few entrepreneurs in his family, a couple,
Yeah.
but that he can call and say, "Hey, what do you think about this?"
Yeah.
And it's a huge issue that we need to be just intentional about.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that if I look back at my career and how I came to what I am doing right now, is I had a lot of mentors that showed me your ceiling is not here. If you do just those two things, then your ceiling is there. And the next
Right.
mentor lift that ceiling and lift that ceiling, and eventually my laziness became my ceiling.
Yeah. That's exactly right. What am I, and that's exactly as it should be. Everyone should be allowed to seek their level.
Yeah.
I say to people all the time, you should not start a business. You don't, oh, you're not willing to not sleep. You don't,
Yeah.
they say you start a business because you want to be your own boss. You want to set your own hours and, you want to be a manager. Well, it turns out like you're a terrible boss to yourself. You report to everybody,
Yeah.
and you could set your own hours and the hours are all of them.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And the bad thing is, if you are the boss, if you don't do the things, they're not happening. It's
Yeah.
not looking over the shoulder like, oh, he or she will take care of it. No, it's if you're not doing it, it's not happening, and you're responsible.
Well, exactly. And I think this is the thing. So when I started to get into the political universe, I'm a policy dork. Like that's part of I have a degree in policy. I studied international affairs. Like I, read The Economist. I was like all that kind of stuff. And so I understood a lot of the issues, no experience with the political process.
Mhm.
In fact, I had been, because of the jobs that I had to be nonpartisan. I like deliberately couldn't even be in the rooms. And so I came at this with this very weird mix of like, I know the things, I just don't know how. And what has been shocking to me is how open and easy it is to get in those rooms.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, I just like sort of assumed like, oh, there's all these gatekeepers, and there are, but they're gatekeepers because they're not like intentionally doing the outreach to bring people in. But as soon as people show up, they're like, oh, great, you're here. And I think that's like the people just don't know where to show up. They don't
Yeah.
feel like they're empowered to be in that room. Similar to you think about the business, components to this.
Yeah.
And they presume that it requires like this huge amount of money because that's all they see on the national level. But that
Yeah.
is just not the case on the local level.
No, on a local level, I was involved here in Cologne in Germany, where I'm based right now. It's literally just be there and raise the hand if somebody asks a question. Can somebody do this and that? Oh yeah, sure, I can do that. And there you go, right? But that also, I still have the feeling it takes a bit of base education because otherwise
For sure.
people are ashamed to say something, to be involved, or to understand some of the contextual things. Is that something where I looked through all the different things that you're doing, be it mobile surf, which I still have a question about, or the Future of Work initiative with Microsoft. What is the potential of technology to enable this and to bridge the gap of the knowledge gap and the experience gap and the education gap? Is that something that this foundation is working on, or what are you doing?
Well, so I mean, I really am excited about the opportunities for technology to like level some of those playing fields. I was
Mhm.
talking to a large employer the other day, and she said, this year, the caliber of people's self evaluations has gone up substantially.
Okay.
And what she meant by that is very much the grammar,
Mhm.
right? Just the pieces like chatbot has lots of flaws, but it's got great grammar. And so you could put in what you want. And for people who lack confidence, either because English is not their first or second or third language, or they just don't feel confident in their education, it just removes that barrier from communicating.
Mhm.
And I think that's one of the things that's really powerful. It's not the only thing, but it's one of the things that I think, oh man, like what if I weren't worried about how I construct that? Or what if somebody crafted the first draft of this presentation for me? Doesn't mean there's not in fact, it means there is more space and time for me to engage in the substantive components because I'm not spending all my time on the details.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a non-native English speaker, I've been using the Grammarlies and so on quite a bit just to make it easy, not to being held up by basic grammar sometimes, right? Or by standing in my own way and using the same 5 words all the time, right?
Well, and I would say that one of the pieces that gets really interesting about that and almost never gets talked about is it's the uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I work in a team where I am the only white male native English speaker in a team of 20 something.
Mm-hmm.
And because my parents were so concerned about me staying in the middle class, they were both first generation middle class. Like for them, anchoring me to that was really important. And so my dad took a second job so I could go to a Catholic school. And, you know, like that was a big deal. And I got at that Catholic school great instruction in grammar. And I will never forget Brother Kelly, St. Xavier High School, being like, Benji, bend down here so I can hit you. You know, he went through every single paper I wrote with a tape recorder. He'd go through and do the grammar, and then he would record his thoughts, and they were brutal. But the end of that is that I'm a competent writer and speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And in this environment, that is not true of most people. And what I hear about that is I read this email 7 times. Yeah. It's not even that it took me that long to write it, but I read it 7, you know, like, so I get that. Yeah. But imagine if you didn't have to read it 7 times, if you vomited out the ideas that you had and then it turned it into paragraphs and that became like the finished product. Great. Now I can move on to adding more value to the world, which puts me back on a level playing field with the people whose parents were able to send them to a classical education.
Yeah. By the way, I had a similar experience with not in school necessarily, but with a former colleague of yours from Boston Consulting Group. When I learned presentation PowerPoint, he was like, "You did a great job. I have a couple of notes," and the notes were 10 times as long as my initial presentation. I was like, "Oh, great!"
Yes. And if your experience at Boston Consulting Group was anywhere like mine, it often was, and then take all the words out and make 2 pictures. You talk too much.
Yeah. By the way, I have these 5 concepts. You could replace all the after I did these, I corrected all the words, right? He's like, by the way, I thought about it. Here's 5 different concepts. Use those. Get rid of all the words. You just use these concepts, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So because you mentioned it before, mobile serve. Let people know what mobile serve is all about, what the motivations behind it are.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I was the CEO of a YMCA that both had a lot of volunteers that we needed to operate our programs, but also our goal was to inspire young people to do service. And we knew that it was working, right? We could see all the amazing work that these young people were doing. And we had no way to capture that data or tell that story. And so part of this is sort of earlier in the mobile revolution, like we just built an app where you could say, I'm here, take a picture. It could geofence for people who cared about verification, although many people didn't. It integrated with social media. And so people could humble brag about the good stuff they were doing, tag their school. So that was how we started. And we knew nothing about tech. I mean, we knew nothing.
Yeah.
And so that became, much more of the focus. And we built what is still a, leading platform from a technology perspective. And there were just a lot of ups and downs about that. Like we were very optimistic about the corporate market. It turned out it was a lot harder to sell into that for lots of reasons. Mm-hmm. We ended up getting a giant state contract that lasted for 1 year because the political winds changed.
Yeah.
We, worked with banks, and I still tell stories about going to parole officer conferences because who needs to verify service hours? People who are doing community service so as not to go to jail.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we tried all these things. Most of them failed. And then we came back to this very small universe in which we work with students and schools and universities and school systems to help track and record their service hours, allow reflections on that. And then we also work with nonprofits in a community who want those volunteers so they can post opportunities. And that's pretty much what we do. Very sometimes we'll do a corporation who's usually it's because the parents of one of the people at the company, or like one of the people at the company is a parent of one of the kids, and they're like, that's really cool. We should do that. So we'll do that, but that's mostly people coming to us.
Okay. That's fantastic. What are the next plans there? Do you have any growth plans there? Because I read something that you, and I lost it in all my notes. I prepared too much, Russ. That's not
That's a lot of preparation there.
What are the growth aspects there? Just to talk about the entrepreneur side of it. Where do you want to go next? Do you want to stay in that niche, or do you still have ambitions to grow outside of that?
So I'm outside of the day-to-day. My co-founder is running that. We got to a point where it made much more sense for him to run it. And so, definitely there's continued growth plans. We just signed a substantial deal with one of the largest school information systems in the country to grow that way. I think one of the hard pieces about entrepreneurship, you said sort of the ceiling is my level of laziness. This is certainly not laziness, but it is really understanding like, no, we're going to be really good at this thing.
Yeah.
And understanding, because you can burn through all your cash, you can spin your wheels, you can do a lot and not get very far. Mm-hmm. And what we're really trying to do is be best in the world at this thing, which we are.
Which I think is an important message, because I do some consulting for very small companies and startups every now and then. And what I hear a lot of the times, I can be this, and I can do that, and I can do this and that, and this and that. And they're spreading themselves so thin that at the end of the day, they're not doing anything. Right.
Right. My co-founder can tell you to the penny how much it costs us to acquire every customer that we have right now through the system that we have.
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing, which you can't do. The other piece that I think is hard for founders is you can go a certain distance on your relationship or your charisma, or, there's a couple of irrational enthusiasts. We had a great partner in the Michigan court system.
Yeah.
And, these guys believed in us. They drove that, but it wasn't replicable.
Yeah.
And, so that I think is just understanding where your superpowers are and really living in those superpowers. And I think that goes through other parts of your life too. This is sort of broader. You talk about crazy people. Like, crazy people have these gifts, right? That are like whatever it is, and you often don't recognize it because you're spending so much time shoring up your weaknesses. Oh, I wish I were better organized. Oh, I wish or the flip side, like, I wish I had better people skills. I need to be more extroverted. Like, no, you're not going to get to your peak if you're spending all your time trying to twist yourself into a knot that you're not.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I know I'm good at the initial ideation. I can make the connections. I can inspire people together. And then if I don't have a project manager to hand that baton to, that's like, I can do that, but it's not going to have the optimal results. And I usually hate it.
Yeah.
And you're causing graphics there.
Yeah. Because AI is everywhere now, by the way.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think to that note, I think what a lot of people underestimate is to trust in the talents that they have, right? Because they're already providing so much value with whatever their special, or how you call it, the superpower is, right? Whatever that is something that a lot of other people may struggle with, right?
Yeah.
And if you combine the right people, they cover your weakness, you cover their weakness, and then together you become even better, right? But
when I got into the political space, I'm a very inclusive and collaborative person because I came out of health equity. And out of tech, a lot of what I saw was we were making things harder than they should be because they were not automated, easy, and replicable.
Mm-hmm.
right? And then also because we did not have systems that were automated, easy, and replicable, only people who could invest huge amounts of either time or energy or money into this could be successful or felt they could be successful. And so a lot of what I have spent time doing as a candidate and now as someone who's serving in government and Metro Council is like, how do we make this a much more approachable universe? Like, how do we say, listen, this is running a campaign has many complex things to it, but that's no more than any other worthwhile area of human endeavor. So how do we break those things down like we have done in every other era? If you want to do a startup in the United States, there's a whole methodology. It's a lean startup. You do a business model canvas, you investigate these 7 things. Mm-hmm. And then within each of those, you can BCG term, you can double click on that. And there's lots of resources around that. And we've just not done that with the political universe. Oh, you want to be engaged because you're super passionate about people experiencing houselessness? Great. Here's some paths to do that. And, that's one of the things that I get really fired up about.
Yeah, let's dig deeper into your political situation and what it is that you're doing today, because we kind of stepped around it so far, but let's let people know.
That's the question. That's the question I want to ask, right? So an entrepreneur, a guy who comes from tech and also comes from understanding the needs of some of the community and being passionate about that, now runs for government.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, you talk about crazy.
How does A connect to B? Yeah. Like that doesn't seem like that's the way that normally goes, right?
Well, and I think it's certainly not, I'm a policy dork. So I've always been aware of, the things that I thought should happen, but the actual mechanics of the politics were surprising to me. And I can tell that story. I think the broader piece of it is, if we want a politics that aren't crazy, we have to get people who are not crazy in politics.
Russ, you and I be out.
I mean, yes, and no, right? I think that's the when we spend all our time with these big ideological battles, right? Like, I'm going to fund or defund the police. Like, that's not a winnable conversation. It's not a useful conversation. What we should be saying is, well, what is it exactly like you would do as an entrepreneur? You don't say oh man, I'm not gonna do, oh, that looks hard, right? Or I'm not gonna do business with that person because I just don't like them. You're like, hey, can we break this down into what actually needs to happen here? Right? Fund or defund the police really is about, can I provide social services to the folks that need social services? And can I reserve the capacity of police to respond to when I need police, to a property crime, to a violent crime? Like, I actually want virtually everyone agrees that, like, in a constitutional way, I want police for that. Mm-hmm. But I really want mental and behavioral health services for somebody who is just passed out in front of the local bookstore. So, like, I was at a meeting today where we were talking about how do we bill Medicaid, because this is fundamentally a public health issue, for those health-related issues. And regardless of where you are in the political spectrum, if I can stop you from a $10,000 ER visit or a $7,000 piece of jail time and instead get you drug treatment at a local nonprofit, I would like to do that.
Exactly.
Well, why haven't we done it? Well, because we haven't had enough people in positions of power who are driving that. Okay. Great. Let's go, friends.
But how do you deal with so many questions? How do you deal with the political ambitions and people that want to simply stay in power and do whatever it takes to stay in power, right?
I mean, how do you deal with investors who, when I was raising money, I think I did 78 pitches in the first year to get 18 people on my cap table, right? And the rest of them were some variation of no, hell no, or F no, right? And they all had their own reasons for that. And they all had their own agendas. And that's just part of the game. We don't talk about that as, oh, this is like a horrible like universe. So I think that's one piece, is just recognizing like you're never gonna please everybody. And we don't ask entrepreneurs to feel like they're gonna please everybody. I don't know why we would ask politicians. You just gotta, like of the people who can vote for you plus one. That's who you gotta please. Which for me means that I get to do this in a way that is authentic to me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's not that this stuff doesn't hurt. Like, it does. Like, there's definitely pieces of this that are just, I don't like it. But you know what? I didn't like people telling me no for my company either.
Yeah.
I think that's one piece. I think the other piece is, yeah, sometimes I disagree enough with the people who I'm working with that I want to unelect them. Like, okay. Like, there are two people on the Metro Council that I serve with right now who do not believe that government has a role in funding parks or libraries. Like, that's not a reconcilable difference. I am actively have helped to recruit their political opponents for this cycle. I am actively recruiting funding to go after them, and I am actively going to knock on doors to get them unelected. Like, no, we don't agree on that. And I will also note, in the meantime, I am working with them on legislation that we agree on.
Yeah. And I think there's also a fundamental problem between, it's probably even rest of the world, but specifically Europe and the US, is if we elect our politicians here, we then spend the entire cycle telling them how they suck.
No, that's definitely not unique to Europe. Like, we totally, yeah. And you know what? That's okay too.
In America, we complain about everybody.
Yeah, that's
universally.
True.
Yeah, and I'd say what's more prevalent on one side of the political aisle than the other. And I don't, like Will Rogers said it best. I don't belong to an organized political party. I'm a Democrat. So yes, we do tend to eat our young. But I also think this is just a general tone thing that we as we demystify people into the process, they then have to take responsibility for collaborating.
Mm-hmm.
So I was having a conversation today with some community activists that I work with who I agree with on 60 to 70% of the stuff that we're doing. And the other 30%, they really disagree with me. And I'm like, I can respect you and respect the role that you play as a rock thrower in the political process. Like, we need people who are pushing the bounds of our thinking, because if we just start with what's possible, then we only have that limited bound. I'm not a rock thrower. In the sort of political lens, I'm an orchestrator. It's my job to bring those ideas that we can get through the political process through that political process. And all I ask of them is, it's fine to criticize me. It's fine to criticize my policies. But what I ask is that we do that in a way that is not damaging to either of us.
Exactly.
Right? Like, we don't have to hate each other. We just disagree about this. It doesn't make you bad. And I'll tell you, the other thing that's interesting is you broaden this range of people who are around the table, particularly people who have never had access to power or resources. It's a real shift to get to, oh, I'm going to use those power and resources, from I just hate everyone with powers and resources.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's the same thing in the entrepreneurial space. Like, you give people control of an organ. I was talking to a founder the other day who was like, I just fired my best friend. And I was like, well, that's interesting, because when you started this, you were really talking about how you were going to have a completely flat organization and you were going to be really focused on, the well-being of all of your employees. And she was like, yes. And but someone's got to make a decision.
Yeah.
And yes, I really respect the needs and mental health of my employees. And this is the work that we do. And if we don't do that work, no one's going to have a job. Mm-hmm. So it's not that we can't do those things, but it is that it is not a blanket. It has to be a balance.
Yeah. I want to go a couple of steps back. You talked about those people that you agree on. You say you always bring up the percentages, like 60, 70%, or with some of them, it felt like 10% agreement, 90% disagreement. That is an interesting point also in today's world, because it's either you agree with me on all the points or we are in disagreement at all and I cannot talk to you. But that is not real life, right? It's not like
It
as
shouldn't be.
kids, just because you didn't like the same music as I couldn't be friends with you, right? We should get over this point. There's other things that we can work on together and other things and other ways that we can have
Yeah.
fun, right?
Well, and I think there's a lot that has become more about identity than issue.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like that becomes where it's really tricky, where, I can have a really thoughtful conversation around what the school notification policy should be if a student wants to identify as a different gender. Like what should be the way, like how can we do that in a way that is safe for the kids? If it's not, or like this, like that's a thoughtful conversation that is worth having because it's new for most people in most schools. And like, great. Can we do that in a way that isn't drawing a broad line between who is evil? Like, can we do that with curiosity and kindness?
Mhm.
And if the answer is no, then I don't think we're going to be able to move forward very well.
Yeah.
And like that's the part where when this is about my tribe and I just defend my tribe, like that becomes very hard. So then I think there's like a real question of like, okay, how do we not disassociate people from a tribe, but change the dynamic to what are the issues of which we are having a conversation?
Yeah, and I think what we're lacking a lot of times is I have a military background, and within the military, I worked with police in Bosnia for the most part. So I learned.
So that's where I don't know if you saw in my bio, like I was stationed there for 2.5 years. Pričam Bosanski.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That was
Okay,
where
I
that
was
was
in
my second job out of the
Sarajevo
World Bank.
in Sarajevo, Rajlovac.
Me too.
Yeah. But
Okay.
So you guys were neighbors then? Okay.
What years were you there? This is fascinating.
both over Christmas, 96, 97, and then 97,
Oh.
98.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I was definitely there were no more RPGs flying by the time I was there. By the time I got there in 2000, they were just leaving them on the porch. I was like, you should probably leave. Not we're shooting it into the house. We're just like remember when we used to shoot these things?
No, when we got there, that shooting thing was over too.
Oh, good.
I was with the PSYOP, so whenever our credo was, if you're shooting, that's maybe not the right moment for us to talk to you. When you're done with that, let's have a conversation. No, while I'm bringing this up, because you mentioned defund the police, I think, and I don't want to make it about that topic. I just might want to make it about empathy and about an effort to think about what the situation is of the person you're facing. Because I was living in the US for 10 years and I've seen 43 states or so. And I've been stopped by police in all kinds of states that I cannot even picture. And I'm not the typical German from the look and feel of it. I don't know if you realize that. So I had conversation with police officers. I've taken pictures with police officers, and a lot of my friends were like, "How could you?" I'm like, "How could I not?" Right? Or even in the earlier days, when I was doing a hip hop TV show, and whenever police were stopping us, those guys pushed me to the front, like somehow you get along with them. I'm like, I'm not getting along with them. I'm just accepting them as what they are. That is people who are doing a job. And some of them are assholes, but that's just what it is like, right? And for some of them, you just have to understand what their situation is.
So today we were talking about this. How do we get mental and behavioral health services to folks who are in crisis?
Yeah.
And one of the speakers who was there, who was from one of the neighborhoods that in Louisville have just been substantially over policed, and by the admission of the police department, really like not constitutionally policed. And we're talking about what is the physical system for getting access to these mental health and crisis workers. And one of the guys who was there was just like, listen, we got to understand that even if the mechanics can work through the 911 system, right? Even if that is technically the right answer, it is culturally triggering for the people that we need to use the system. And I think this is where, you talked a little bit about the entrepreneurship and the politics. Like
Mhm.
in entrepreneurship, you spend time investing in understanding your customer journey.
Exactly.
Right. And you don't say, well, listen, I don't care. Like they have to use the system. Well, they don't actually. And when they're paying you money, you need to make the system work for them. And it's that same mentality that I think is so important when we get into the components of government of saying, look, I need to make this system work for people. I have to meet people where they are.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't set up systems that are exclusionary. I should, in fact, overinvest in the people and communities that have been underinvested in to make the systems accessible. Because frankly, like, again, regardless of whether you care about equity and inclusion or belonging, like from a financial perspective, if we can address those issues, that's so much better off.
Yeah.
When I create a housing policy that incentivizes people in the upper middle class to buy houses, like, great, that is good. I'm not saying that's bad, but it's not going to have the same societal financial impact as somebody who is a first-time homeowner for whom that is the beginnings of generational wealth. And so dollar for dollar, I should be investing in the thing that's going to get me the most return as a community. And I think that's the mindset that I'm really trying to bring. And I'm trying to invite other people to come with me. Like, hey, if you'd rather stop talking about how much you hate Democrats or Republicans or like F the libs or those Nazis, like you'd rather like just have a second, like, can we talk about how we do smarter housing policy?
Yeah.
Like that would be great.
Yeah, but that's the empathy thing, right? It
is 100%. You are 100% right. It's the empathy thing.
Whatever people are saying, right? And to
Yeah.
kind of understand what their situation is.
That's right. That's right. Because when I say customer discovery, it's funny because I work for this university and like the first little bit, I was like, well, can we do a customer journey? And they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. You just like completely dehumanized all of these people. And I'm like, no. That is I can use whatever language you need me to use so that we can be, comprehend each other. But like, that's a human that we're trying to understand and do this empathy walk with. And they're like, empathy walk. Let's do an empathy walk. Okay, great. Let's do an empathy walk. But the empathy walk has to end up with this person who is eligible for food benefits, eligible for health insurance, and isn't currently getting the things that they need to thrive. Can we fix that? Yeah. I'd love to fix that.
Yeah, having the dialogue with people. Again, my Bosnian story is, here I was day 2 in Bosnia, in Sarajevo. Helmet, bulletproof vest, a radio with an antenna 3 feet high, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And again, I was with the PSYOPs, right? Big rifle, people behind me, stronger, bigger, more armored than I am. And I was like, and every time that radio irgendwie somehow made a noise, people would back off.
Yeah.
And then we would interview them like, why are you not talking to us? Why do you not trust the S4 and I4 forces?
Right. Yeah.
And then one guy told us, what do you mean? You don't trust us. Look at what you look like. I'm standing here in a shirt and a much too thin coat for Sarajevo. And you look like some kind of a turtle and
Terminator. You look like Terminator
right behind you.
Yeah,
like Terminator, right? And you talk about trust. While we don't trust you, you don't trust us, right?
So that country and that war were in many ways so small. So I got there in 2000, and I remember this is probably 2000. I went there as an intern, and then I came back in like 2003, I think, and we were doing this deal. And it was one of the larger deals. So it's about a supply chain for this rubber company. And these guys are sitting across the table from each other. And one of them is like, and they're different ethnicities. And one of them is like, I know your voice. And the other one is like, I know your voice. So one of the weird parts of that war was that it was so close and there were often people on the same radio frequencies, different forces. And so they would talk smack to each other over the radio. And these guys had been on the opposite side of the battlefields. They'd been shooting at each other.
Yeah.
Right. And they remembered because one of them was, they were taunting, they were trading, like you're blah, 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 blah. And then they'd shoot at each other for a while. And then and then Bosnian is like the best language in the world to curse in and say horrible insults. And there was just this moment of real tension. Like, I mean, all of us, all the four, I'm like an intern in the back, like, but everyone else is like, ooh. And then they're like, and that was really funny when you said that thing about my mom. And everyone was, oh, and the deal got done.
Yeah.
And to me, like that is evidence that yes, we are in this weird spot as a country and as a world where we have done some really terrible things to one another.
Yeah.
And there is a path forward, but we have to be really intentional about investing in it.
Yeah. Let's take a little zig to the zag. Awesome Foundation. What is it that you do there?
Oh, so the Awesome Foundation, and if anyone in Louisville wants to pick this up, there is still a little bit of money in the community foundation accounts. The Awesome Foundation is an international organization that has this framework. You gather together 9 or 10 friends, you each kick in a pot of money, and then either every month or every other month, you get together and give that money to something awesome. And that's it. That's the only criteria. Something awesome. And so in our iteration of this, which lasted for many years, we funded gardens with metal water features. We funded nonprofits that did entrepreneurship stuff. We funded theater productions. We funded a rain activated chalk art project where everyone went out with this special kind of chalk and you did stuff on the sidewalks that didn't show up until it rained. And
That is
why did we
awesome.
fund that?
There you go.
Because it was awesome.
It's awesome. Yeah.
And so that was a great, I highly recommend. And so there's like a franchise and they give you like the model, and then we partnered with the community foundation in town to do that. It was really cool.
Absolutely. What is your personal highlights in terms of what are your biggest challenges, and what is the one thing that you're the most proud of in the situation that you're in right now?
I think the biggest challenge that I have is I would really like there to be more people who believe that it is worth investing in our civic community and government, that this is a thing that we should be spending at least as much time and energy on as we are with economic development or other things. Like, this government is the thing we do together. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not out there somewhere else. It's not them to us. Like, this is us in a democracy that's functional. Like, we do this. And the way to impact big D democracy is through little d democracy. It's getting involved in neighborhood associations. It's voting. It's figuring out who your political candidates are and deciding whether or not you like them. And if you don't, get active in unelecting them.
Yeah.
So to me, like, that's the challenge, because I feel like so many other things will fall into place if we have the right people who are setting the playing field on which all these other things are operating.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. One last thing. Dinner guest 5, dead or alive, for most awesome dinner. Who would that be?
Just for my own sanity, I'm going to say alive, because that's otherwise I will get analysis paralysis. I would love to have dinner with the Obamas. I'm super interested in them. I'd be really interested in, this is good. I'd be interested in the surviving Koch brother. I would really I'd just be fascinated to know what is in his brain. And I think this is from a political perspective. I would probably also be interested in having dinner with Elon Musk. And then I think, I got one more. I don't know. It might just be the five of us and my wife, and my wife, who is phenomenal and should absolutely be at that dinner hanging out with me. Teresa Reno-Weber is way cooler than any of those people.
Fantastic. I think that's the best ending to this interview with another crazy person. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you so much for taking time, and go out there and rock Louisville.
I will keep trying to be crazy. And now I'm going to have to go back and do some research on your all's backgrounds. Wow, you guys are crazy. This is exciting.
Crazy to mad, yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you a lot, Ben.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.